Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Today's webinar is the second webinar in the three-part series of Guardian Animals Protecting Livestock. Today's webinar is on donkeys and the use of donkeys protecting your livestock with sheep and cattle. Today's webinar is brought to you by Leading Sheep Project, which is funded by AWI and DD with the support of AgForce. You'll be hearing from two producers, both Andrew Martin from Tambo and Bruce McLeish from Karara. Both producers are using donkeys on their properties, and they'll be talking about their experiences with donkeys being used as livestock, as guardian animals for livestock. You'll also be hearing from David Jenkins from the Charles Sturt University, who has done some research with donkeys also being used as guardian animals. So without any further from me, I'll hand over to Bruce McLeish.
How we came about to be looking at donkeys is I heard of a story in Toolmaree of a lady who had a pet donkey running with free-range chooks, and went out in the morning, and there was a mangled fox in her where free-range chooks were running, and the only thing that could have done it was the donkey. So my daughter and I got on the internet and keyed in guard donkeys, and it's more or less gone from there. We went about looking on the internet about different things. I did a fair bit of inquiry to find out if there's anybody doing it in Australia, and to my knowledge, or what I could find out, there was no one. So it was sort of suck and see, and we put the word out that we're after donkeys, and finally got onto a mob of 4 east of Warahgai. That there was geldings and jacks which had never been bonded with sheep, but I had those jennies there. So we started the process of breeding, and on we went from there, and I think now we're sort of running about 20, and we've bred several and bonded a fair few, and so I'll follow through the presentation. Some of the advantages, I suppose, that I've documented there is that we've found is that they consume the same as a sheep. They're quite happy, especially in the trap rock, grazing on the same diet, and obviously do a fair bit better during the winter on the natural feed than even the sheep do. So as yet, we haven't needed to drench any, or like I suppose alpaca, which is alternative. We don't have to shear them, obviously, but we have done dung samples on the donkeys, and as yet the information we're getting is they currently running, they don't have to be drenched. Very good in their paddocks, and that's on sheep fences, plain wire fences. We aren't having any trouble with them climbing over anything. Obviously, if you've got certain gate latches and they're a bit cunning and quiet, especially the ones that flip over a bolt, they learn very quickly how to open them. So sometimes you have to put a wire on them. Obviously, if there's a jack and a jenny either side of the fence, it's like a horse, a stallion, and a mare. You'll have trouble, but you've got to manage that. The other beauty of them is, they live 20 to 40 years. We've got an old jenny there, which obviously isn't breeding, but when we got her, apparently, she's just about to click over 40 years, and she's just about had it. But I suppose the point is that when you put the time and energy in, they have got a long lifetime, and once they're bonded, I think they're not going to change. So it's an investment over, investing in the animal and putting the time in bonding. It has got a fair, there's a fair bit of value if you work it out over the years. The other thing, I suppose, especially which came from the information out of Canada where they've got guard donkeys protecting sheep and cattle, is that they can handle packs of wolves and coyotes. And I think that is one of the beauties of them is that you're not going to have any chance of investing the money and the time and having one killed by dingoes or wild dogs. And again, as I said, they're very, very hardy animals. Even in our country, which obviously is a pretty hard country, we don't even have to do anything with their hooves. So, so they're the advantages. A few of the issues that I suppose that we've come across, and just from a lot of people calling me and working through it, and I think now there are a few things in place and a few people are sourcing them from different areas, but I'm not aware of anywhere you can just go and purchase a guard donkey. There is a person in southwest Queensland, I think, has sold like a couple, but at the moment I don't think you can actually go out and purchase a guard donkey already bonded, and unless you are out in the sort of western country, it is a lot harder to actually access them, because the ones I've been accessing have mainly been people have been using them as lawn mowers or as pets. Like any animal, you have to be careful around jacks, and also careful when they're around your sheepdogs. The other thing, I suppose, with the jacks is if there is a Jenny in season, be very careful. You know, as I say there, we haven't had any problems, but, you know, there is a stat that there's more people killed in the world by donkeys than any other animal. Actually, I think the stat is that there's more people killed in the world by donkeys than there is even that are out of plane crashes. So, yeah, there's a lot used in the world, and you have got to be a bit careful around them. Children can be very casual, especially because they can bite and kick. Your kids learn pretty quickly, but you don't want to have them in the situation. I suppose it can be a little bit noisy, especially if you've got, you know, Jennies around the house and Jacks out in the paddock or whatever. Yeah, it's not good for sleep patterns when they're calling out. One of the issues we've had is that we had a gelding that we didn't bond with any coloured lambs, and we changed to using Suffolk rams. And yeah, it's straight away as soon as the black lambs were born, we just happened to be there. He was grabbing them and shaking them because he hadn't been bonded with the black lambs. So I think it'd be like anything. It's something they're not sure of. Yeah, they're going to get rid of it. Yeah, and the other thing we've found is that I think, you know, all donkeys will guard to a certain extent, but we've got, you know, we've found that some are brilliant and others are mediocre, and I don't know how you can, you know, change that. But yeah, yeah, I think most will do it, but I have got some that are absolutely brilliant that not even our sheepdogs can stay in the yards or anywhere, whereas others don't mind our sheepdogs, but if a neighbour's dog turns up something like that, they'll chase them and try and grab them. Just the bonding process, we've tried a couple of methods, but this seems to be the best way that we can, well, the best way, and it's working. The biggest thing, and it's an obvious thing, is that when you bond the weaner donkey, make sure you take the mother well away, so, you know, take it out to the back of your place or as far away as you can. It's no good if, you know, he or she can call the mother and they'll whinny back and forth. It's probably like, you know, weaning cattle. You've got to get the cows right away. And it doesn't take long at all. And once they're bonded, you know, by lock them and giving them a hay and water in a yard or whatever it may be, and monitor them, it doesn't take long to see how they're all of a sudden they are looking for a companion. And the thing we probably do is that we go from the yard into a sort of a acre or sort of a holding paddock or a laneway, just to give a bit more room. And as soon as you do that, they start off where they'll separate. One will hang at the other end, each paddock like sheep down one, donkey the other, and then, you know, within a couple of days they're back together. Probably one of the things that we've got to the point where we've got one Jenny we bonded that is that so attached to the sheep that as you walk and bring them in, she'll actually rub her face on the sides of them. So it is nearly, yeah, it is incredible how attached they do become to the sheep, and obviously that's why they are the way they are if there's any intruder. The mob size per donkey, I mean, I've only given that as a guide to what we do. The biggest thing I think with the donkeys is the sheep camps. And I know out in the Western country where you've got larger paddocks and several sheep camps, I'm not sure how you handle that, but Andrew might be able to, you know, give more information on that. But normally, if you have got two donkeys with a mob of sheep and there's two sheep camps, the donkeys will camp together with one of the mobs. So yeah, I don't know how you combat that in larger mobs and larger areas. But in saying that, if there's one camp and there's 1,000 sheep, there one donkey's fine. So I'll move through. The handling of the donkeys, as I say there, when mustering, donkeys travel the lead of the mob and sometimes they try and block the mob. They walk back and, you know, they sort of work back and forth a bit like a lead dog, obviously wanting to hold their mob back. And then they usually settle down and come back through. With our dogs, we've got 4 dogs. 3 of the dogs are fine with a donkey, but there's one dog for some reason the donkeys hate, and they'll actually just go over the top of the sheep or try and knock you off your bike even to get to the dog. So, yeah, it's interesting how they do it, but generally the donkeys seem to like it. I suppose they're intelligent enough to know that they're seeing a dog all the time, that it's okay and how they can differentiate. Yeah, in the yards, I think the best thing to do is when you move them there is separate them in the yards as soon as you can and put them off in a yard by themselves, or put them through to a mob that you won't be doing any management or husbandry with. Just makes it a lot easier because there's nothing worse if you've got a donkey going off the drenching race and get a bit ugly. And yeah, just obviously like handling a horse, don't put too much pressure on them. We've got some that we've actually put on halters and we've pulled them around so they can leave, and we've got others that we haven't done it with. It doesn't seem to make a lot of difference in the yard which way they are. They seem sensible enough if you're handling them when you're handling your sheep. the worst thing that can happen if you do go to bring the mob of sheep in is not to bring the donkey with them, because that's when they probably will go over fences trying to get to the mob of sheep. So, treat them. The other point is that moving donkeys between different mobs doesn't seem to matter. They don't seem to have relationships with individual sheep or whatever. It's just as long as they're with sheep. And I mean, that's what sort of we've witnessed. As long as they're white, or if you bonded them with black, whatever it may be. Management. We've had a very good program in breeding, very easy. They seem to get in foal very easily. Their gestation, their pregnancy, the birth all seems to have had no problems at all. And we've done that with sort of a Jenny that was only 2 years old. To the older ones, we haven't had any problem. I heard there's a few problems with with placentas and things like that after. A similar problem what you can have with horses, but so far we haven't had an issue and haven't had to have any vet or anything attend. The only problem is it takes so long to breed them. The other thing is, and that was what I read in some literature, that jacks should be separated from foal and jennies. Again, they can be pretty possessive, and that's probably just a good management thing if you can do it. It's on the management of them. Other than that, I think it is pretty easy. Obviously one of the things is when you've got them bonded is make sure that they can't get back to their mothers by somebody leaving a gate open or something like that. You've got to really do that first 6 or 12 months where they're separated, so there's no chance of sort of breaking the bond. That's about it.
Righto. G'day there, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity, and congratulations to Leading Sheep and Alex and Tony for organising the day. Thank you, Bruce. That was very informative. Like Bruce, I'd heard about donkeys a long time ago and was not getting anywhere really because no one else was doing it. I had a clue that people in Canada were doing it, and since I've got my donkeys, I've been to Canada and I've actually seen a donkey chasing a black bear, which is no great threat to sheep, but this donkey put the black bear out over the fence without any ceremony at all. They were both doing about 40 kilometres an hour when they hit the fence, and the donkey stopped and the bear didn't. So I've seen them in action in Canada, and Bruce's story about finding that the dead fox in amongst those chooks is one that I've heard as well. I originally started, Toolmaree's halfway between Tambo and Augathella on the open downs country. We're inside the barrier fence. About 15 years ago, the dogs, for the first time in Toolmaree's history, which is fairly long, were becoming a problem. We started a syndicate, and in the first few years, I think within 6 years, we'd cleaned up, between 7 properties, we'd cleaned up nearly 2,000 dogs using a trapper. The dogs were just getting more willing and more willing and more willing, and I reckon I had to move towards something other than a dog or a syndicate. I bought some alpacas in about 2000, I think it was. I firstly started with alpacas in about 2000. I'd heard about alpacas, I'd read quite a bit about them, and went away to this north coast down near Mooloolaba and brought home 6 alpacas. It took me about a week to bond them, got them stuck into their job pretty much straight away, and they certainly work. That photo there chasing my old red dogs, the alpacas hate me for it. The red dogs hate me even more for putting them around the alpacas and the donkeys for that matter, because they work. I was having a little trouble with alpacas shearing. They get full of burrs. They've got some husbandry issues that were not suiting my management style. Shearing them is a problem. You've got to keep the worms out of them. Their hooves and their teeth can be a problem, and they can pick up things like pigweed, and they were, while they weren't dying en masse, I was having similar issues with the alpacas as I was with the sheep. In the meantime, I was given a litter of Maremas, and I thought, well, here we go, I'll try these fellas out, and they work too. You can see old Roma, her name is, she's sitting in the pink poodle kennel there, guarding the sheep, and they work. But I've always got an issue being concerned about whether they pick up a bait, whether someone travelling past might put them in the car, or run over and put them under the car, or shoot them, and so I'm constantly concerned about the feeding of and the maintenance of the Maremas. While I got them, and I'm not running the Maremas or the alpacas down at all. They work quite magnificently. But I'd always been chasing the donkeys. And I finally got onto a group of wild donkeys out near Windora. I'd spoken to Bruce a couple of times and got his feedback on it. I'd spoken to the Donkey Sanctuary down in Sydney and done quite a bit of research on the things, and finally got onto a group of donkeys out near Windora, out between Windora and Birdsville, and they were certainly wild donkeys. We got to the yards in which they'd been put by the helicopter, and they hit the back of the yard, and I thought, here we go, there's trouble here. But within about half an hour, we had them on the truck. They were standing up nicely. We drove them home here to Tambo in the day. By late the next afternoon, I was actually stroking a couple of them down the face, albeit through a rail. They'd come up and they'd take a bit of hay, and they got very quiet very quickly. I bonded them in that mob there that you can see. I think they're all there, but I bonded them in the mob that came back from Windora. With the sheep, slowly, as Bruce described before, we put the sheep a bit closer to the cattle yards. Donkeys were in there with hay and water, getting quieter and quieter and quieter. They saw me every day, many times, and I had the work dogs off. They wouldn't allow the work dogs in the yard, which was the best indicator right from the very start. I got an old pig, a large white sow that wanders around the place here. Well, didn't they put her up the other end of the paddock? So they right from the very start, they showed signs of being very anti all the things that are enemies of sheep. I moved the sheep in closer and closer and closer, and until they were in the yards with, and they had rams and ewes and lambs and some wethers and coloured sheep and all sorts of, it was just a mob of stragglers that I had around the house here. For a couple of days, everything looked to be going swimmingly. Let them out into a holding lane, put them back in at night, let them out a bit further into a bit bigger paddock, and within a week or so, the job was right. I put them in the paddock with this straggler mob. It happened to be the mob at the paddock there that had the Maremas in it. The Maremas were quite comfortable in that paddock, had been there for 2 or 3 years. Within a week, the Maremas had left the paddock and found themselves another mob of sheep up the other end of the place, and ever since then those Maremas will not go back into that paddock. Wherever there's donkeys, the Maremas will not go near them. I don't know what happened, but the donkeys won. How they won, I don't know. I've still got all my Maremas, but the two, the Maremas and the donkeys, just do not mix. They mix quite happily with the alpacas. There's no issues there. Bruce has already been through some of the issues that I was going to cover about the management. Jennies or geldings to use as guard animals instead of jacks. You certainly don't put jacks out without a jenny with them. That's very dangerous stuff. I've got a group of jennies just with the jack in them, and there doesn't seem to be any issues, as Bruce described, until the jennies are in season. Then you want to stay well away from the paddock, keep your work dogs away from them, keep the bikes away from them, keep kids away, keep everything away from them until the work has been done in that regard. But there are no issues at all with mustering, bringing them into the yards. You can draft them out and leave them by themselves because they are a mob. As Bruce quite rightly pointed out, in these further far-flung areas, I've found that one donkey is really not enough in a 2,000-3,000 acre paddock. And I've come to the conclusion, as I did with the alpacas, that just keep tipping them in until the problem goes away. I have to say that with 50 or 60 alpacas on the place, 4 Maremma dogs, and now about 20 donkeys, I have had no sightings at all of dogs on the place, with the exception of one. And it didn't last very long on the joint. Between all of them, they put the dog back out into West Quarter, whereupon it was shot fairly quickly. No problems at all with feed. I think by the time you have to supplementary feed donkeys, there'll be no other livestock around. The because they're pretty good doers. But the bonding process, it's really not an issue at all, and I tend to think that it's more to do with the fact that if it's an enemy of the donkey, well then that's the end of it. It just so happens that the donkey's enemy is the same enemy as the sheep and or the cattle. They quite happily walk in and amongst cattle, in and around them. They camp with them, as they do with these sheep, as you can see in that photo there. This bonding process, this slideshow has come from a slideshow presentation I got from the Donkey Sanctuary, and I've covered a lot of that stuff before. I have not tried, as Bruce has, to just bond one donkey with a mob of sheep because of the area. I've just found through the experience with the other ones that numbers count, and they seem to be grazing where the sheep are. They camp with the sheep. Those sheep in that paddock with these donkeys have access to 4 or 5 different waters, 3 or 4 different waters, and you're always finding a couple of donkeys with some sheep at one water, or if all the sheep are up one end, well, the donkeys are there with them, or if the sheep have split up after a shower of rain, the donkeys split up with the sheep. They can cover some country very quickly, and if you, and I've actually tried, took out a yard dog with me, and a paddock dog. I put the sheep in a corner and got the yard dog, tied the old work dog up, the old paddock dog, and let this great woofing yard dog out, and it put on a fair sort of a turn. Within 10 minutes, the donkeys had arrived, the cavalry had arrived, and they put that dog straight back into the back of the ute very, very smartly, and they hung there to make sure the dog didn't get out of the ute. So they've got good hearing. They can cover the country pretty quickly. They're quite happy for me. I was on foot there. They're quite happy for me to poke in and around them. I tied the dog up and left the dog in the back of the ute, but I was on foot and poked around them, and they don't seem to take any offence at all to me. You can't see him there, but old Red Dog's up near that old gidgee tree, and he was floating, and he came around the gidgee tree and went around the back there and got into my ute, which was just to my left-hand side when I took that photo. That's a Jenny that had a foal not too long ago, and that's another young Jenny following along there, and the rest of the cavalry's spread out back along the paddock there, putting old Red Dog, who hates the issue, but anyway, it proves the point. There's no question that they do some damage if they can. I've seen them kick rails and trying to get at a dog, a work dog. They kick at the rails, and man, do they kick. So I have absolutely no issues that they work. I've thrown these photos in of the mule. It's a bit of an urban myth. That's actual photographs, but the mountain lion, this is in Utah or somewhere, Wyoming or Utah, and that is a mule. The mountain lion had been shot. I don't think it was dead, but it had been shot and incapacitated. But you can see the look on the face of the dog up the back here. They're not going to have anything to do with what's going on there. And I've heard that mules are even more savage. Around Wendora, there have been mules out there, and they are murder on any intruder, particularly pigs. They'll get pigs down in those channels out around Wendora and just torment them and torment them. To that end, I've taken my best jack and stuck him with some mares that I've got at home here, courtesy of a neighbour. They're unbroken, those mares, and this old fellow has a bit of trouble keeping up with them. But when it comes to breeding a few mules, he's worked out how to get the bigger of these mares down into a washout. I've seen the consummation of the marriage. This is only a couple of months old, this photograph, and he's only been with them a couple of months, but it didn't take him long to work out that horses and donkeys can breed. And I'm going to try, if the mules don't work, well, I haven't lost anything because the horses don't get used. And I can put old Donk back with some jennies if the mule experience doesn't work. I can't add a lot more except that for this particular operation, given that donkeys live considerably longer than alpacas are sort of 15 to 20 years. Maremmas, I'm not sure how long they live, but you certainly wouldn't get any more than about 20 years out of them. You'd probably, given all the other dog breeds I've had anything to do with, 15 would probably pull them up. But these fellas, I've heard of donkeys well in excess of 50 years of age. In fact, the old fella that I got these donkeys from out near Windora, he's got a pet there that is over 50. So whatever donkeys I've got and whatever mules I breed will see me out well and truly, and it's a good investment. Look, even if you've got to pay $500 for a donkey, it's really only 5 lambs, and if he does that, saves 5 lambs every year for 40 years, well then you've well and truly got your investment back. I don't think I can add any more except to say to you guys, congratulations on organising these webinars. I think it's a great way to go. One other thing, I would much prefer if the whole grazing community in this area anyway, in any area for that matter, was more coordinated and was more dedicated to cleaning up the wild dog problem. Coordination and dedication would do the job, but it's not happening, and I don't think it'll ever happen for proper coordination. And so I think it's every man for himself. If you've got it controlled at home, and the dogs are going somewhere else, well, they're going to have to do something about their dogs. And if it's the same as what Bruce and I and all the other guardian animal exposees are doing, well, eventually we're going to force the dogs back to wherever there are no guardian animals, and it might be the best way around it. I've had no problems with fences. I've had no problems with waters. I've had absolutely no problems with other domestic animals. They just float along very nicely with them, and it doesn't take them long to wake up that their job is protecting. And I think I just think they're the answer. If they're not the answer, they're certainly 90% of the answer. So thank you guys, for organising this. It's very good, and I'm quite happy to answer any questions that there might be.
Righto, thank you, Andrew. There is a few questions that have come into the question box. So there's a couple of questions about, I guess, cost of purchasing donkeys. Do you, either Bruce or yourself, have any sort of rough figures on that?
I've never purchased any, so I better throw to Bruce for the first one, but I'll have something to add later.
Yeah, I mean, well, the donkeys I've got, I was given some to the point where I paid $800 for a Jenny that was in foal. It really comes down, I mean, I think it's to the point with donkeys, if you can get them, then work out their cost. Because I don't think they're ready available unless you go out and where Andrew's gone, and I mean, obviously to bring them into the closer country there'd be a cost in that. But the figure that Andrew threw before, around $500, say for for an unbonded animal. I think a bonded animal, because of the time and energy you put into it, I don't know, throw a figure, I don't know, $800, something like that for a bonded one. But yeah, I think it is a very new thing, so it's a market that's probably going to be dictated by demand.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good answer from Bruce's end. I didn't purchase these fellas. As I said right at the start, they were given to me. Old mate had just finished shooting 1,500 of the blessed things, and these were what was left from a year-long campaign at shooting what's a real problem for these guys. I have since I've since gone a bit further afield, and I have feelers, pardon the word, but I have feelers out for wild donkeys, and it's further up in the Northern Territory. You'll hear about it if I get onto a decent mob, because there'll be a road train load of them, and that's the only way you can get them back economically. And I'd probably bond a few and start selling them off that way. But really and truly, even to do that, it's going to cost $300, $400, $500, $600 an animal to get it back here and bond it and fool around and get rid of the jacks. And maybe for a little while there's going to be a market for jacks, so we won't have to go to the problem of cutting them. They're out there. I know they're in very large numbers in the Northern Territory, on the bottom end of the Barkly Tableland, right across into the Kimberleys. There's some down around Packsaddle in South Australia. There's various colonies of donkey around up on the north coast, up around not Babinda, in behind Collinsville. There are hundreds of wild donkeys on a couple of properties I know of there. But getting access to them is a different story. But whichever way you go, it's going to cost you a couple of $300, $400, $500 a donkey to get him home and get him bonded and get him settled and put him in a paddock. But that's well and truly worth it from my experience.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I'd agree with what I was saying, is that you wouldn't get much under $500 for an unbonded donkey. So there's a couple of questions regarding pigs. So Andrew, that you're saying that they do chase wild pigs?
Oh yeah. Just the other day, I plugged a big black wild pig in the paddock next door to the donkeys. They heard the shot and come screaming across. Just as this pig did a sugar doodle down into the creek, he was heart shot, so he'd come back through the fence into the donkey paddock. And didn't they give it to him when they had him down the bottom of the creek? He was already dead, but there was lots of noise and there was lots of trampling around. I went over and dragged the pig away. And why, I'm not too sure, but I did. Respect for the dead or something. I don't know what it was that got me to drag him out of the road. But there is just, from what I've observed, anything that's an enemy of white man or white sheep or black sheep or cows, it seems to be an enemy of the donkey, and that they get stuck right into them.
Right, very good. Also, there's a question to do with protection against foxes. I'm not sure if Bruce or yourself have had seen any experience with foxes and donkeys.
Andrew, no, we don't have. I think there's probably that I'm aware of. We've shot 3 foxes. Well, my roo shooter has shot 3 foxes, which is all he's seen in the last 3-4 years. And I put that down largely to, I think the fox numbers have dwindled during the drought years, but I put that down to the fact that I've had alpacas here for about 10 years, and they're certainly murder on foxes. And so I don't have any real experience with foxes. So I don't have any.
Keep going with the questions. Andrew, do donkeys and alpacas work together?
Yeah. Yes, I've had no issues. I did. I've got some breeding alpacas in the horse paddock here, just running up close to the cattle yards where I first introduced the donkeys to the place. There was a fair bit of noise and bellowing and screaming when they first saw the alpacas, and in particular when they first smelt the alpacas. But it didn't take long. They're inquisitive animals, and so I put the alpacas in a little laneway on the other side, had sheep in one laneway and alpacas in the other little laneway, the other side of the cattle yards. And within 2 days there was no problem. There was always a problem with that old white pig though. None anymore. She's in the freezer, but they just never let up on the pig. It didn't matter how many times they saw her, they never let up on it.
All right, well, hello everybody, and from my perspective it's been terrific to hear people who are actually using these things in completely different country to what I'm used to. I'm been operating out through the ACT and out the back of there, which is pretty rugged sort of country. It's heavily treed, very undulating. We have a good bit of snow in the winter, and the main problem with the blokes that were using donkeys or started to use donkeys where I am is foxes and town dogs. And once they introduced the donkeys, the problem was very, very much reduced. The donkeys, alpacas and all these things, they shouldn't be regarded as, I think at least, as the silver bullet. They're one of the sort of tools you've got in the box, but they are extremely useful. Now, the donks have been used in lots of places around the world with varying degrees of success, and in the US they've used them as coyotes and small felids, sort of bobcats and things, foxes, and also wolves. And the wolves have been reintroduced to a number of places in the States where it's starting to cause a few issues. Canada, coyotes and wolves. Switzerland, wolves. The Swiss situation, they've just really only got wolves up there that they're working with, and they're sort of still exploring what they can do, because the wolves are moving through from Italy. They've been reintroduced. They're getting the top order predators back into the environment up there, and they're starting to spread out. And then Australia, well, I've talked about the foxes that we have used them against, and certainly town dogs, but we've found that they're very handy for wild dogs as well. And I think we've really heard most of this stuff, but they are docile. The donks are docile around people. They're pretty handy animals to have around, and they are aggressive towards canines. But we found that the aggression varies quite a lot between individuals, and we found the best way to pick your donkey really was to introduce it to a dog and see what it did. I mean, the dogs weren't too impressed with this, but you could get a fair idea pretty quickly on whether the donkey had a good or bad attitude to dogs, whichever way you like to view these things. And we found that they were most useful with sheep and goats, but other people have used them with other animals. We heard today about the other situations where they've been used. The good thing about them is certainly down in our part of the world where baits are being put out, the donks can be used in the area where the bait's being used. It's a bit more complicated if you've got traps out. The donkeys tend to go and investigate and stamp around them, particularly if you're using a lure of some sort that they find interesting. But they certainly require minimal maintenance, as we've heard, and they can survive in pretty rugged country. The stuff that I've been looking into from the States is they've used them against eagles coming in and grabbing lambs particularly, and feral pigs, and we've already heard about their attitude to pigs. And also we've heard that they are pretty easy on fences. Marama dogs will go through fences and go and check out other areas, whereas the donks pretty much stay where they're put. They eat the same food, they don't chase cars, and veterinary-wise they're very similar to the livestock, so it's not a big issue, and they're long-lived. The sort of useful life in our experience has been sort of 8 to about 15 years, but they can certainly go on longer than that, as we've heard. Maximising the best outcomes, well, Jenny's or gelded jacks, and we've heard all about this too, so really everybody's preempted my talk very nicely. But what we found is only using a single donkey with each flock, and I was really interested in what Andrew said about having several donkeys in a paddock with one mob of sheep. I'm very interested to see how that worked. We found that not rushing the bonding time, having it even as long as 6 weeks, really helped getting your naive donkeys, your naive animals, bonded up really solidly. It also allows the stock a bit of time to get used to the donkeys, but I think it's different horses or donkeys for different courses. Selecting only aggressive donkeys. One of the issues that we found is that where we work with these things is that the paddocks are usually very undulating, very hilly, often got lots of patches of blackberries and rocks and sort of clumps of trees and things. And we found that the donks could have a bit of trouble there because the line of sight's very important. I know we've heard today that sound can also be important, but they certainly do get a lot of their information through looking. And we found that keeping the mob size down to 200 or 300 sheep in the more open paddocks and even fewer in the really rugged paddocks was the best way to go. But certainly we've heard today that using multiple animals in open, sort of bigger paddocks, you can get up to 500 to 1,000 sheep, which I found fantastically interesting. If one of the things to think about too is if you're feeding sheep with and they've got donkeys with them, you've got to be a little bit careful if you're using urea or rumensin, because that's poisonous for donkeys. So that's well worth keeping in mind. That's sort of really all I was going to say, because I really felt that today's issue, today's event was really a sort of exchange of ideas and knowledge between the various people there. So I wanted to keep what I said down to a minimum and just to spark a few ideas. But as it's turned out, I really haven't put anything new into the mix that you blokes have put in already. So I might just finish there, and we'll see what the questions are that come out of what I've said.
Righto, thanks for that, David. That was very good. We've got a heap of questions coming through. So there's questions here saying, I have to take my donkeys out when the ewes lamb as they chase them and separate from the ewe.
And that's an issue as far as we're concerned, because that's the most vulnerable time, particularly where foxes are concerned, because they get a sniff of placentas and stuff and they're in like Flynn. And that's the time when you really want to have your maximum protection. Now, maybe it would be, it's all sort of relatively new country that we're exploring here, but maybe it would be worth having a different suite of guard animals, and you could take your donkeys out and maybe put alpacas in during lambing or something like that. I really don't know, but certainly donkeys around lambing ewes, it can be a combination for a certain amount of disaster and lamb loss.
Right, Andrew or Bruce, have you experienced anything with that?
Yep, I have. What I've found is that the younger donkeys, say 12 months to 2 years, are more inclined at different times to play with the lambs. I haven't seen them kill them, apart from my instance with the not being bonded with blacks. But once the donkeys seemed to get to that 3 or 4 year old or 5, there wasn't the play that was with the younger animals. So we may be, that may be telling us, if you're bonding a younger one, that may be the younger ones to leave away from ewes. But I have got all my donkeys with ewes and lambs, and at the moment I haven't had to pull them out because of it. But in saying that, I mean, I'm like everybody else, still learning every day.
Yes, I agree with both those guys, but I had the problem with the alpacas and the Maremas, and I haven't seen the problem with the donkeys yet, and I think I know why, is that when I bonded the donkeys, I bonded them with the full suite of it was a rubbishy mob. I had an old broken down, a couple of old broken down rams, one crossbred ram, blackface fella. I had there was a couple of blackface lambs. There was a couple of ewes had lambs during the bonding process. They had some long tails, some short tails. Oh God, it was a horrid mixture of sheep. And the donkeys have no problem with lambs. I had a problem with alpacas playing with lambs, jumping around them, jumping on them, striking them, just having a game. They were brand new. And I suddenly worked out that I'd never bonded them with a mob of ewes that were lambing. So I bought the whole lot of them back, had half a dozen ewes next to the sheep yard, or the cattle yard, I think it might have been, doesn't matter, next to the yard, while they were having their lambs. I fed the alpacas, I fed the alpacas and the sheep for a week or two. No more trouble. They got used to the fact that lambs were a part and parcel of their job. I had the same issue with the Maremas, and the Maremas are no longer with us. The other Maremas either took stock of their position, or they weren't inclined to play with the lambs. But yeah, it is a common issue, and my suggestion would be to bring them back in and rebond them.
Yes, I'm just wondering how they go with feeding if you're feeding. Well, we've been feeding favour beans or lupins or any type of grain. Where, there'd be a risk of gutsing it. Does anyone know? Has anyone fed that type of thing to the sheep with donkeys in there?
I've had blocks out, but I haven't actually had any. Well, because we've had pretty good season since we've done it. I haven't actually had a situation where I've been supplementary feeding. But the only thing I've had out was blocks, and it was probably a mistake. And they had urea in them, and I nearly died when I realised. But none of the donkeys died, so I don't know what happened there. So yeah, I don't know what anybody else comment, but there is a known thing that horses and donkeys urea will kill them, but mine didn't die.
No, I'm in the same position. I would imagine, being an equine, if there was good tucker about, they'd hook into it all right, and it'd be just suck it and see, John. But generally the donkeys, they're great browsers, you know. They're a bit like camels, and they're the last ones, from my observation, to go looking for tucker when it gets a bit dry. But I've not been in the situation where I've had to feed out lupins or anything since I've had the donkeys, so I really can't answer the question.
Were dingoes wary of smell of the donkeys? So would they be aware of the smell, do you think? Andrew or Bruce?
My opinion is that I've got donkeys that were unbonded, like ex-pets, and where they're like a stallion. They have one spot where they roll in the paddock, another spot where their dunghill is, and I've had them where I think there is something in the smell and the territory the donkeys cover too, as well as their presence. I also think, by doing that, if you've got a dog running a track and they come across the smell of the donkeys, we think we put it down to that as a chance that a dog was diverted into a trap because he was didn't know where he was and was unsure. I think there is something in just having the bigger animal in the mob as well or around, apart from the chase.
All right, Andrew, you haven't got any comments on that one?
No, I haven't. It's an interesting thought, though. As my opinion happens to be that the bonding, we all talk about bonding, and there's certainly something to it, but I think it's more to do with the fact that from the point of view of alpacas and donkeys, it's your enemy is my enemy, and the maremas there's just no question that it's territory marking, and it's the smell of the maremas and the fact that they bark all bloody night. So there could well be something about the smell, and they certainly have their own smell. There's no question about that.
All right, we'll keep on moving. Another question for you, Andrew, probably. Will donkeys get big head on buffle like horses?
That's a very good question, and one that I cannot answer, I'm sorry. I imagine so, but I can't answer the question.
Yeah, same here. I've got no idea. We're not lucky enough to be able to grow it.
Yeah, no, I've got nothing to add on that issue, but I do have one question for Bruce. How did, or both Bruce and Andrew, how do your donkeys react to shorn sheep? Because when we were doing some work with alpacas, we drafted the alpacas off before the sheep were shorn and then reintroduced them a bit later in the day, and the poor old alpacas nearly had a fit. Have you seen?
I've actually got an instance where I was coating sheep and had a young Jenny that was bonded, and when the coated sheep were coming off the end of the coating race, she got big of that fright. She went through 2 wooden gates, smashed them. So yes, I think it's another instance of you rebond and do, because it is a massive change. I haven't had it with shorn sheep, but I've had it with coated sheep.
Yeah, I think that's just one of those things you never read about, but can be a bit of a surprise when it happens. It certainly gave us a bit of a shock. Poor old alpaca nearly nearly died on the spot, I think.
Right, well, I've got a question here. How do you go using paddock dogs in the paddocks with the donkeys? From John Milne. Any answers for either Andrew or Bruce?
Yes. Look, g'day, John. How are you? Look, I've had the donkeys here for about 15 months, and I'm lucky enough to have had the same. Or the dogs are lucky enough to have been allowed to live long enough to be the same work dogs for the 15 months. There is one new pup that I've taken out a couple of times, but they've been with the older dogs and they've been with me, so I haven't had an issue at all. I prefer to leave the donkeys because I don't have single donkeys. I've got groups of donkeys. I'll just draft the donkeys off to one side and leave them standing under a tree and take the sheep on. The donkeys will follow along behind the sheep as we're mustering, but they don't seem to have a great issue at all with the work dogs, provided I'm with them.
All right, Bruce, any comments?
Yeah, our experience is that the paddock dog that wants to go to the lead, all of a sudden he doesn't want to be there with the donkeys out in front, because the donkeys will send them back. But generally it's not an issue because the same sort of thing, as Andrew's saying, is that the donkey, I think he's fairly intelligent. He works out pretty quickly that he's a mate of, he's with you, and if he keeps his ground, he's all right. But in saying that, I've got one Jack at home that it doesn't matter who you are or what you are when it comes to being a dog, he'll try and get to them and kill them. So it's generally okay, I'd say. Okay, you can handle it. You can use your dogs.
All right, thank you. There's a question for you, Andrew. You mentioned that you use them in a couple of 1,000-acre paddocks. What are your thoughts about paddocks the size of, I think it's the 10 or 20,000-acre paddocks? How would they go?
Yeah, I answered it. I'll answer it the same way as I answer the questions about the alpacas. How do you go? How do you go with a big paddock and not enough alpacas? Well, just keep tipping them in until you don't have the problem would be my quick answer. And you're starting to run out of time from what I can see here. But more country, more waters, more donkeys.
Would it be better to have a combined mob of sheep with a few donkeys rather than a few mobs with donkeys in each mob? So you have to have one big mob of sheep with donkeys.
Good question. Can't answer. I'm probably doing it with 1 to 2 donkeys. Andrew's doing it with a lot more. So, yeah, I'd say, again, jury's out. I know what Andrew thinks.
Andrew thinks that, well, it's if you've got it depends on your situation. I mean, if you've got little paddocks and you've got coated sheep like Bruce has got down there, well, then it's obviously small mobs of sheep with a donkey in each mob. But out here, I'm not going to, you're nearly better off going out of sheep if you've got to change the way you do it and carve your place up into 100 different paddocks. That's just crazy. So I just leave the sheep run in the same mobs as I've always done and just keep tipping in the donkeys until the problem goes away. And for the last 10 years, whether it's donkeys, Maremmas or alpacas, the problem goes away. Just keep tipping them in, you'll get rid of the problem.
All right, very good. Bruce, wondering if you still lose any sheep since your donkey investment? Yes,
still do lose them, but that's probably more to me the positioning of having, I don't know, whatever it is, 45 paddocks, just not having enough donkeys to cover where I've got sheep. I do have a dog will come in, bite a couple, but the biggest thing, or kill, the biggest thing is that I'm not getting the 10 and 12 bitten or the dogs, coming back every night. They seem to be hunted and moved on or go elsewhere. I know I might be making somebody else's problem, but as Andrew raised, the ones who aren't doing anything about it may have to do it. But yes, we do still have the losses. But comparably, what I'm losing now is manageable. What I was losing before was not sustainable. So yes, I still do lose the odd one. But yeah, nowhere near like it was.
All right. What are your thoughts on donkeys handling packs of dingoes? I guess 6 dingoes or more. Have you had any?
No, I'd say the donkey would say bring it on. From what I've seen with the dogs at home, 3 of our young sheepdog pups were all around them, and the whole it wasn't the number of the dogs didn't matter. I don't know what Andrew thinks. I think it'd be not a problem.
I'm with you. They're like. If I could start a football team up with the choice of Kiwis or donkeys, I'd take the donkeys every time because the tougher the going gets, the tougher the donkey, the harder the donkeys go. It's I don't think it matters. And if you've got constant groups of big packs of dogs, well then just keep tipping more donkeys in because they'll get rid of them.
All right. What about, have you had any experience with older donkeys? And bonding older donkeys effectively.
I haven't tried it, but I have got older donkeys which once I've bonded younger ones, I've put the older ones back that were unbonded, and they seem to be with the bonded one. And I think whether they're just running them as a companion or not, I'm not sure. But yeah, but I wouldn't. I've tried to bond older donkeys with the sheep, and it hasn't worked for me. But I'm talking about donkeys that were pets. I'm not talking about donkeys out of the wild. So I think. In Andrew's situation, you'd probably have a lot better result than me.
Yeah, I don't know about whether I'd say it was a better result. All I know is that once you've got your core group of guardian whatever it is, in this case donkeys, once you've got your core group, you don't have to go through the bonding process with every single donkey, because you can put him in with a group of bonded donkeys and it doesn't take him long, him, her or it doesn't take them long to get the hint. If you're having troubles with it still, well then run it back in and bond it by all means. But it's, it's like the young pup and the old dog. They soon pick up all the tricks.
Question, would you go further afield to get mules or stick with the closer donkeys?
Andrew here. Look, no, I can't really answer the question. That final photo I showed of old mate with his mares, I might be able to answer the question in a few years' time. But no, at this stage I'm quite happy to be searching for donkeys, not for mules.
Okay. What about donkeys chasing kangaroos? Do they chase roos?
No, I haven't.
No, I haven't seen it either. They don't like you hunting a mob of roos through them. They'll kick and strike and put up a bit of a fight if you drive a mob of roos at them. But they haven't had an effect on the roos like the Marimas do, or the alpacas for that matter.
All right. A question here, which you might have already covered, I guess, in some of it. What problems do you see with dry licks? Have either of you, as Bruce said, you've fed blocks to sheep where donkeys have been? What about you, Andrew? Have you had any trouble with licks?
No, I haven't had any trouble, but I haven't put any lick out. So I've been lucky enough to have pretty good seasons here. So no, I can't answer the question.
All right. David Jenkins did mention earlier in his presentation that urea and romancin could have been a problem. So I would say that donkeys and horses would have a similar nutrition system. What about feeding sheep cottonseed? Have either of you fed cottonseeds, I guess, with donkeys in the paddock?
No.
Accidentally a gate got opened into our cottonseed shed and the donkey's still alive, but no, I have not done it on a continual basis. No.
Have you changed your practice at all, Bruce or Andrew, with mustering now that you can't use dogs as much, I guess? You say that you still do use them, but has it changed your management and mustering systems a great deal?
No.
No, not at all.
No.
Do donkeys chase goats away as well?
No.
Don't know. I haven't got any goats.
No, I've got the odd little mob of goats come through here. No, they pay no attention to them at all.
If you have cattle and sheep, should you bond with both initially? Have either of you had any experience with cattle as well?
No, I haven't had the experience that Andrew, like Andrew said, he'd done it, hasn't he?
Yes, yes, I have, Bruce. These donkeys of mine came from a cattle place, came from Galway Downs, so they grew up with cattle, and they've got cattle in with them on, as cattle come and go through the yards, I leave some in the paddock with them. There's no consequences at all. I imagine if you've got some donkeys that have only ever grown up with sheep, I'd be showing them some cows for a couple of days to make sure they understood, put the sheep in with the cows in the paddock next door to them or in the yard next door to them. I imagine I'd do that just in case there are any consequences, because I do know, I've heard stories of donkeys. In fact, it was in Tasmania, a fellow runs young bulls for the coals trade down there, and he runs mobs of 50 and 60 bulls together up until about 18 months of age. And he's got a donkey in with each mob of bulls, and the minute a bull goes to mount another bull or goes to fight another bull, the old donkey will come across and give him a good kick in the guts. And he controls their night urges with donkeys. So I imagine you've got to be just a little, you make sure that you introduce them to the cows if they haven't had any introduction to them.
Also, do either of you had any experience with electric fences, and can you still use electric fences with donkeys?
I don't have electric fences, so I can't answer the question.
No, I can't either. No.
Saying there's a large area of feral donkeys in North Queensland in the Upper Burdekin and Charles Towers areas for people to think of. And also, has there been any collared research for donkeys? Any work with collaring donkeys, I guess? and research, do you know of?
What was the collaring them?
Yeah, just with as they've done with the maramas, do you know of any research that has been done?
No, I couldn't find anything.
No, I haven't been able to turn anything up on that either. The Canadians may have done some research, but I don't think they've collared them.
I guess Hendra be an issue if there's bats there as well, so that would depend on the area, obviously.
Yeah, but just one thing of interest. Can you hear me, Alex?
Yep.
Yeah, when the equine flu was on, when Warwick was shut down, obviously all my donkeys had to be injected and had to be vaccinated and registered. So that's probably something that was a bit out of left field when it happened.
Right then, thank you very much. Well, I might wrap things up. It's 1:10, so we'll finish things up. I'd like to thank all three presenters, Andrew, Bruce and David, for their presentations today. That was excellent, and there's been a massive amount of questions from participants, so that was great to see. Once again, I'd like to thank Leading Sheep for bringing us today's webinar, and there's a couple of websites there on your screen if you wanted to get further information.